Have you ever wondered about those little rules or traditions that we follow, sometimes without even knowing why? The ones we often just write off as superstitions? Well, today, we're going to dive deep and unlock the hidden and often brilliant logic behind these ancient customs. You might be surprised by what we find.
So let's just jump right in with a classic. How many times have you been told, don't cut your nails after the sun goes down? It's bad luck. Or what about this one? You're walking or driving and a black cat darts across your path. Do you get that little jolt of hesitation? Do you wonder if you should turn back? Is it really a bad omen, or is there something else going on? And then there's this simple, innocent question that some people believe can completely ruin a person's plans. So are these just silly old wives' tales? Or is it possible there's a practical, logical reason behind them that we've just forgotten? Well, that's what we're here to find out. Okay, before we start debunking anything, we need to understand the core idea here. Why have these beliefs stuck around for so long? It really all comes down to how you look at it. Let's get one thing straight. Our ancestors weren't simple or foolish. They didn't have fancy labs or the internet, but they had something incredibly powerful: generations and generations of lived experience. Their traditions weren't magic spells, they were survival guides built on trial, error, and very careful observation. And this, right here, this is the heart of what we're talking about. What we might call superstition or blind fear today actually started out as life experience. It was practical data collected from the real world about what works and what doesn't. So how does that practical wisdom turn into what we think of as superstition? It's usually a simple three-step process. First, a practical rule gets created for a good reason, like safety. Then, as generations pass, the original why behind the rule gets lost. And finally, all that's left is the rule itself, but now it's enforced by a vague sense of fear or bad luck, instead of logic. All right, so let's put this idea to the test. We're going to dive into our first set of examples, starting with some really common rules you might even follow in your own home. Okay, back to the nail cutting. So many of us have heard this, and a lot of people still follow it. But what's the real story here? Why was this such a big deal? Check this out. The original reason had absolutely nothing to do with luck. Think about it. Before electricity, you had candles or oil lamps. Your tools like nail cutters were probably not very sharp. Trying to cut your nails in the dark with a blunt tool, you were just asking to get hurt. And as for days like Tuesday or Thursday, well, those were often set aside for things like fasting or worship, so you wouldn't be focused on personal grooming anyway. The real takeaway is that the original message was all about safety and discipline. Here's another one that's really common in many cultures: the idea that you shouldn't give or receive things, especially money, with your left hand. So why the big focus on which hand you use? The logic here was actually super practical and, social. Since most people are right-handed, the right hand just became the default hand for clean social interactions, like eating, shaking hands, or giving something to someone. It was a simple, non-verbal sign of respect. It wasn't about one hand being evil and the other being good. So today, the real lesson is that respect is about your intention, your state of mind, not which hand you happen to use. Okay, now for one about food that might actually surprise you. In many households, you'll hear that you shouldn't eat yogurt or curd after sunset because it's bad for you. Where on earth did that come from? This one is fascinating because it's rooted in ancient medicinal wisdom, specifically Ayurveda. The thinking was that our digestive fire, our metabolism, is lower at night. And since yogurt is considered a cold food, eating it late could create mucus and make things like a cough or a cold worse. It's kind of like an early form of biohacking, if you think about it. The modern lesson isn't to be terrified of yogurt at night, but to simply listen to your body and see what works for you. All right, so let's shift gears a little. Now we're going to look at how simple, practical warnings, things meant to keep you safe, slowly transformed into these powerful omens of good or bad luck. The black cat. This is probably the most famous superstition out there, right? But was the poor cat always seen as this bringer of doom? The original context here is everything. I want you to imagine you're traveling, maybe on foot, through a dark forest path centuries ago. Suddenly, a small animal, like a cat, darts across your path. The immediate thought wasn't, oh no, bad luck. It was, wait, what is that cat running from? It could be a signal that a much larger, more dangerous predator was nearby. So the advice wasn't fear the cat. It was pause, be aware, and pay attention to your surroundings. It was about situational awareness, a critical survival skill that's now been twisted into a fear of the poor cat.
Okay, this next one is so interesting because the question seems completely harmless. But in some families, asking someone, "Where are you going?" right as they're leaving is seen as a major no-no that could jinx their whole trip. What could possibly be the reason for that?
This one is actually all about psychology, and it's brilliant. Imagine someone is heading out for something important, a big exam, a job interview, a tough negotiation. Their mind is focused, they're in the zone. If you stop them at the door and ask a question, even a simple one, you force them to break that concentration to think of an answer. The original rule wasn't about some magical jinx. It was about protecting a person's focus and mental state. The real takeaway is that respecting someone's focus is a powerful form of support. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just offer a quiet nod of encouragement.
So, after going through all these examples, what's the big picture here? How should we think about these traditions in our modern world?
At the end of the day, the real problem isn't the customs. A lot of them, as we've seen, have some real wisdom baked into them. The issue is our relationship with them. It's about following them out of blind fear instead of with conscious understanding.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. We have a choice. On one hand, there's the danger of just believing without questioning, of practicing these things out of fear. On the other hand, there's the wisdom of trying to understand them, of preserving the intention behind the rule. The goal isn't to throw away our traditions, but to rediscover the why, to keep the wisdom, not the fear.
But hey, this is just the tip of the iceberg, right? I'm sure there are dozens of other customs and so-called superstitions you've grown up with or heard about. I'm genuinely curious. What are they? Drop them in the comments below. Let's keep this conversation going.
So it all boils down to this: have faith, respect tradition. That's all great, but do it with understanding. Ask questions, be curious, and then you can decide for yourself what wisdom is worth carrying forward into your own life. Thanks so much for joining me.